I never thought I'd be the person to burn my own family to the ground. But here I am, sitting in my car outside a fancy restaurant, holding the metaphorical match. They think this is a celebration. They're wrong. This is a funeral. An hour ago, I discovered my uncle and aunt stole my brother Leo's surgery trust fund, $250,000, to pay for their daughter's extravagant wedding. My hands are on the steering wheel. Terrifyingly still. They took my brother's future. So, I'm going to take everything from them. Absolutely everything. The walk from my car to the restaurant. A place called La Viña, with an obnoxious ivy-covered facade. Felt like it took a year. Every step on the cobblestone path was a deliberate act of will, pushing against an invisible force that screamed at me to get back in my car and just drive away. The cool night air was a useless balm against the furnace of rage burning in my chest. A rage so hot it felt like it was melting my bones. Through the large, glowing picture window, I could see them. The perfect family portrait. Staged for the world to admire. My Uncle Richard. His face already flushed with what was undoubtedly very expensive wine. Laughing that booming laugh that always made my skin crawl. My Aunt Diane. Fluttering around the table like a nervous, jewel-encrusted bird. Constantly adjusting things that didn't need adjusting. And my cousin Amelia. The bride-to-be. Dripping in diamonds that were bought with the money meant to save my brother's life. They were laughing. Toasting to a future built on a foundation of theft and betrayal. I pushed through the heavy oak doors. The scent of garlic and old money hitting me like a physical blow. A young hostess with a practiced smile started towards me. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" Her polite greeting died on her lips as I walked right past her. My eyes locked on my target. My focus was absolute. A laser beam, aimed at the private room in the back, where they were celebrating their treachery. The air inside that room was thick. Oppressive. It smelled of rich food, truffle oil, and seared scallops, and a smugness so potent, I could almost taste it on the back of my tongue. The sound of their forced laughter, and the delicate, incessant clinking of champagne glasses, grated on my raw nerves like nails on a chalkboard. Aunt Diane saw me first. Her eyes widened. Her painted-on smile faltering for just a fraction of a second before snapping back into place. "Scarlet darling." What a surprise. Her chirpy, fake greeting was a physical assault. It was the same voice she'd used a month ago, to tell me how sorry she was. How they wished they could help with Leo's medical bills. But things were just so tight. I met her eyes with a flat, dead stare that made her smile wither completely. Amelia gave a clueless little wave from across the room. Her diamond engagement ring, catching the light, and sending a shard of brilliance into my eye. I completely ignored her. I walked directly to the head of the table where Uncle Richard was holding court. Mid-sentence in some self-important story about a golf game. I popped the glittering bubble of his perfect world, just by standing there. His jovial expression melted away, replaced by something hard and cold. He was a big man. And he stood up slowly, using his height to try and intimidate me, to loom over me. It didn't work. I felt nothing. "We weren't expecting you," he said. His words heavy with warning. His voice a low growl meant only for me. I let the silence hang for a moment, enjoying the sudden, delicious tension that had gripped the room. The other guests, Amelia's future in-laws. We were looking back and forth between us with confused expressions. Then, in a voice loud enough to cut through every other sound, a voice that was calm and clear as a winter morning, I made my announcement. "The family lake house is going on the market tomorrow morning." Richard's face went from angry to panicked in a split second. His complexion turned a blotchy, unhealthy red. He started to bluster, trying to keep his voice down but failing. "Don't be ridiculous. Scarlet, that's a family asset. We'll discuss this later." "No," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "We'll discuss it now. You're right. It's a family asset. And as per grandfather's will, Leo and I have a 51% controlling interest. Grandfather was a very wise man." He stared at me, speechless. The rest of the family looked on in stunned horror. I let my gaze sweep over every single one of them. From my pale, trembling aunt to my clueless, shocked cousin. My lip curled into a small, tight smile that held no warmth. "We need the funds for Leo's surgery," I said, making sure every person at that table understood the direct link. Think of it as a necessary sacrifice. I turned to leave, pausing at the door to deliver one final blow. By the way, the appetizers look lovely. I hope you enjoy them. I walked out without looking back, feeling their combined hateful glares burning into my back. It felt like victory. A moment later, my phone buzzed. A text from my uncle. It was short and to the point. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life. I smiled. No? He had. An hour later, I was waiting in my dark apartment when the pounding started. It wasn't a knock. It was a frantic, angry assault on my front door. The wood vibrating with each furious blow. I knew who it was. I took a deep breath, centered myself in the cold rage that was now my only fuel, and opened the door just enough to see them. I blocked the entrance with my body. Uncle Richard and Aunt Diane stood there, their faces twisted with a fury that would have terrified me yesterday. Tonight, it just looked pathetic. My small apartment suddenly felt like a fortress, and I was holding the gate. How dare you, Aunt Diane hissed, attacking first. Her voice was a shrill weapon. Humiliating us like that, in front of Amelia's future in-laws. What were you thinking? She invoked the sanctity of the lake house, her voice trembling with manufactured sentimentality, as if a building of wood and stone was a living, breathing thing. That house has been in our family for generations. Your grandfather built it with his own 2 hands. My retort was dangerously quiet. So has my brother. I looked straight at her, letting the words sink in. You're worried about a building. I'm worried about Leo's life. He has our grandfather's eyes. He has his laugh. What good are generations of history if you let the current generation die for the sake of a party? That's when Richard tried to take over, his voice booming in the narrow hallway, trying to physically intimidate me with sound. We were going to pay it back. This wasn't theft. It was a loan. This was a strategic move. An investment in this family's future. Marrying Amelia into that family secures all of us, their connections, their wealth. It benefits everyone in the long run. You're too short-sighted to see the bigger picture. It was the twisted, self-serving logic of a man who believed his own lies, who saw people as assets on a balance sheet. But it was my aunt who delivered the truly devastating blow. Diane. The woman who used to bake me cookies when I was sad, who taught me how to braid my own hair, looked at me with cold, dead eyes. The fury was gone, replaced by a chilling pragmatism. The doctors only gave Leo a 60% chance. Scarlett. It was a huge risk. A fortune for a maybe. She said it so simply, so calmly, as if discussing the stock market. We made a practical decision. A practical decision. The words echoed in the sudden silence of the hallway. They hung there between us, obscene and unforgivable. I had a flash of a memory being a little girl in her kitchen. The warm smell of cinnamon and vanilla, her hand on my shoulder as she showed me how to roll out dough. That memory curdled, turning to poison in my mind. They hadn't just stolen money. They had weighed my brother's life and found it wanting. They saw my dying brother as a bad investment. In that instant, the last vestige of love I had for them, the last shred of shared history that mattered, died. My rage froze into something harder, colder, and permanent. My voice was barely a whisper when I spoke again, devoid of all emotion. You are no longer my family. Get off my property. I shut the door in their stunned faces, the click of the lock echoing their finality. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, feeling nothing but a profound, hollow emptiness where my heart used to be. The next morning, my phone rang, dragging me out of a restless, nightmare-filled sleep. It was the realtor, Mark, and his voice was tight with a discomfort that traveled through the phone line. Scarlett, we have a problem. He cleared his throat, a nervous, gravelly sound. Your uncle's lawyer just filed a temporary restraining order to block the sale of the lake house. My blood ran cold. I sat bolt upright in bed. On what grounds? I demanded, my voice sharp. He has no grounds. There was a long pause, filled with the sound of shuffling papers. He's claiming, the realtor said, and the words clearly tasted bad in his mouth, that you are not of sound mind. I couldn't speak. The air was punched out of my lungs. it continued, reluctantly reading from the legal filing he'd been sent. The declaration, written in sterile, vicious legalese, argued that the immense emotional and psychological stress of Leo's illness had rendered me mentally unstable and emotionally erratic. They claimed my decision to sell the house was not a rational act to fund a surgery, but a vindictive and impulsive lashing out, born of an unstable grief. They were twisting my love, my desperation to save my brother, into a weapon. They weren't just trying to stop me, they were trying to paint me as crazy, as an unhinged, hysterical woman in the eyes of the law. It was a calculated, cruel move designed to discredit me, to strip me of my power, and to make me the villain in my own story. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text message. A notification popped up on the screen. It was from Amelia. It was a masterclass in passive-aggressive manipulation. A long, rambling paragraph that was perfectly crafted to sound concerned while being utterly venomous. It went on and on about how she knew I was going through a lot, how she was praying for me and Leo, but that my actions were tearing the family apart. She wrote about how I was being selfish, how I was ruining her happiness, how this wedding was the most important day of her life, and I was tainting it with all this ugliness. But it was the final line that felt like a physical blow. A punch, straight to the gut. It read, "Leo wouldn't want you to tear the family apart like this. He loves us." They were trying to steal his voice, to use my love for him, his supposed love for them, against me. That was their mistake. It didn't break my resolve. It forged it into steel. They had declared war. They had no idea I was about to bring an army. I didn't just get a lawyer. I hired a legend. Marcus Harrison was a probate litigator, so notoriously ruthless that my own grandfather, the man who set up the trust, once called him a brilliant monster. I remembered Uncle Richard scoffing at the name years ago at a family Christmas party, calling Harrison an overpriced shark who preyed on grieving families. The irony was so thick, I could choke on it. Harrison's office was on the top floor of a downtown skyscraper, all glass, steel, and the quiet hum of immense power. It smelled of expensive leather and ambition. He sat behind a desk the size of a small car, his face looking like it was carved from granite, as I told him my story. I laid out every single detail, the stolen trust fund for $250,000, the lavish wedding, their cold justification of it being a practical decision based on Leo's 60% chance of survival. I told him about the restraining order and their deliberate, malicious attempt to have me declared mentally unstable. Harrison listened, his steepled fingers pressed against his lips, his dark eyes never leaving my face. His expression was utterly unreadable. He didn't interrupt once. He just let me pour out the entire ugly, sordid story. When I finished, the silence in the room was absolute. So heavy, it felt like a physical weight. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor. "Your grandfather was a very wise man," he said, "and he did not trust your uncle as far as he could throw him." He swiveled in his massive leather chair and turned to a sleek, built-in cabinet behind him. He entered a code on a nearly invisible keypad, and a drawer slid open with a silent, hydraulic hiss. From it, he retrieved a thick, leather-bound file. My grandfather's name was embossed in gold on the cover. He placed it on the desk between us with a soft, definitive thud. "These are the original trust documents." He flipped through the pages with a practiced, almost surgical efficiency. Stopping at a tabbed section, he turned the binder around for me to see. "Article 7, Section B," he said, tapping the page with a perfectly manicured finger. "The Emergency Medical Precedence Clause." He explained its crystal clear, ironclad terms. In the event of a life-threatening medical situation for either myself or Leo, the designated trust funds were to be used exclusively for that purpose. Any other expenditure, for any other reason, would constitute a malicious breach of fiduciary duty. Then, a thin, predatory smile touched his lips for the first time. It didn't reach his eyes. "And here's the penalty for that breach." He pointed to the next paragraph. A dense block of text that I now realized was a time bomb. "Immediate and total forfeiture of the trustees and their direct descendants' entire inheritance from your grandfather. That includes their house, which your grandfather owned outright and let them live in. It includes their stock portfolio, their retirement accounts. Everything. By stealing that money? Your uncle didn't just break the rules. He triggered a financial landmine that's going to blow his entire life apart. The Doomsday Clause is more than enough to win, Harrison said, closing the binder with a decisive, final thud. The sound echoed in the quiet office. We'll countersue. Get the restraining order thrown out. And seize their assets. It's a slam dunk. He leaned forward. However, his eyes narrowed in thought, but something about this still feels off. He tapped his pen on the desk. Liquidating $250,000 in long-term securities that quickly isn't easy. It raises red flags. It takes time, and, more importantly, it takes signatures. A deep, cold suspicion was growing in his expression. He made a call. And the next day, he brought in a specialist. A forensic accountant who moved with the quiet, unnerving intensity of a bomb disposal expert. 2 tense days passed. I felt like I was holding my breath the entire time, waiting for another blow to fall. When I returned to Harrison's office, the atmosphere was heavy, charged with a grim energy. Harrison's face was like stone. The accountant, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit, was sitting beside him, a stack of files in front of her. Ms. Evans, Harrison began, his voice low and serious. We have some bad news. The accountant laid out the facts with cold, emotionless precision. To execute an emergency liquidation of that size, the trust required a signature from the primary trustee, Uncle Richard, and a consent signature from a secondary beneficiary. Me. I never signed anything, I said immediately, my heart beginning to pound. Harrison slid a document across the polished mahogany desk. It was a high-resolution copy of the liquidation request form, sent over from the investment firm. And there, at the bottom, next to my uncle's arrogant, flowing script, was my name. It was a messy, unfamiliar scrawl, a clumsy, obvious forgery. The betrayal was no longer just immoral, it was a felony. My heart hammered in my chest, so hard I thought it would break a rib. He hadn't just stolen from Leo, he had used my name to do it, implicating me in his crime. But the accountant wasn't finished. She pushed another file forward. There's more, she said quietly. We traced the funds. Bank records show that only about $125,000 actually went to wedding vendors, the venue, the caterer, the jeweler. She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle in the silent room before she spoke them. The other $125,000 was wired to an offshore account. An account in the Cayman Islands linked to an online sports betting site. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. I stared at her, then at Harrison, unable to process it. The wedding, the perfect dress, the expensive flowers, the diamond jewelry for Amelia. It was all a cover story. A brilliant, sickening piece of theater to hide the truth. My uncle was a gambling addict with massive debts. He hadn't sacrificed my brother's life for his daughter's happiness. He'd sacrificed it for a losing bet. The lie was so much bigger, so much uglier than I could have ever imagined. 2 days later, my phone lit up with a text from Uncle Richard. The tone was condescending, magnanimous, the digital equivalent of a pat on the head. It was a summons to a family summit at his house that evening. Let's resolve this like adults. It read. He thought the restraining order had me trapped. He thought he held all the cards. He was preparing to dictate his terms, completely oblivious to the fact that he was walking into his own execution. I walked into their cavernous living room that evening and found the stage perfectly set for my final act. The whole family was there, a united front of delusion and greed. Uncle Richard, Aunt Diane, Amelia, and even her fiancé, and his deeply uncomfortable-looking parents. My aunt and uncle stood by the grand fireplace, posturing like royalty about to address a disobedient subject. The arrogance was breathtaking. It was so thick in the air I could smell it. Richard cleared his throat, a smug, self-satisfied look on his face. He launched into his monologue, proposing his deal. He would graciously drop the ridiculous restraining order to declare me mentally unstable. In return, I would agree to take out a massive mortgage on the lake house to fund Leo's surgery. He presented this as the only sensible solution, as if he were a benevolent king, offering a crumb to a peasant. He was actually smiling, convinced he had already won this war of wills. I let him finish. I let the silence stretch, savoring the moment, watching the smug certainty on his face. Then, my response came out as a quiet, simple no. Enque. As if we had rehearsed it 100 times. The front door opened. Marcus Harrison entered, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that screamed money and power. He was followed by 2 plainclothes police detectives. The air in the room didn't just crackle, it shattered. Amelia's future mother-in-law gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. The fiancé stared, his mouth agape. I locked eyes with my uncle, whose face had gone from smug to confused to terrified in the space of 5 seconds. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You didn't steal the money for a wedding, I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence like a shard of glass. You stole it to pay your gambling debts. You forged my signature on the liquidation documents to commit wire fraud. And you funneled over $125,000 to an offshore betting account? Richard's face turned to ash. I saw Aunt Diane turn to him, her expression one of genuine, horrified shock. This was the first she was hearing of it. She had defended the theft for a wedding, for her daughter's future. But this was something else entirely. Her perfect world was imploding right in front of her. Marcus Harrison wordlessly handed a thick file to the lead detective. Bank records, the forgery analysis, and a sworn confession from the notary, Mr. Miller, bribed to witness the signature. He stated calmly, his voice echoing in the dead quiet. The detective stepped forward, his eyes fixed on my uncle. Richard Miller, you are under arrest for wire fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of justice. As they led him away, Richard's final look at me wasn't one of remorse or sadness. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. I met his gaze and felt absolutely nothing at all. The void inside me was complete. The fallout was catastrophic and swift. Amelia's wedding was, of course, cancelled. Her fiancé's family wanted nothing to do with a family of criminals and liars. My aunt, whose entire life was built on my uncle's web of deceit, was left humiliated and, thanks to the doomsday clause in my grandfather's trust, completely bankrupt. The court seized every last asset they had: the house, the cars, the stocks, everything. But there was one piece of good news. The best news. Mr. Harrison successfully petitioned the court to have the stolen money released directly from the seized assets. $250,000. Transferred to the hospital for Leo's surgery. The operation was a success. I'll never forget the profound, overwhelming relief of sitting by his bedside in the recovery room, holding his hand, and feeling the strong, steady rhythm of his pulse beneath my fingers. That was the only victory that mattered. That was the only thing that had ever mattered. I sold the lake house. The memories were too tainted, too soaked in betrayal to ever enjoy it again. With the proceeds, I bought a small, quiet home for me and Leo, with a garden where he could sit in the sun during his recovery. I have completely and permanently severed all ties with that other side of the family. They don't exist to me anymore. They are ghosts from a life I no longer live. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I reflect on the scorched earth path I took. I wonder if there was another way. A less destructive path. But any lingering doubt vanishes the moment I look at my brother, sleeping peacefully in his bed, the healthy color finally returning to his cheeks. I know I made the right choice. My peace doesn't come from revenge. It comes from the quiet, steady, beautiful beat of my brother's healing heart. When your own family forces you to choose between their comfort and a loved one's life, is there any line you wouldn't cross? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.